next session that I'm actually really excited about, I have to thank Janine from the Colorado Ovarian Cancer Alliance for the introduction to Dave and Scott. They had used them for an event that they had done that actually kind of came out of a completely different, not a change to a virtual event or event that they normally had, but they found Dave and Scott, who has this really great platform for fundraising called Pledge It. And what to introduce a little bit of it and why I think it's so important to this is, normally when we have our symposium, I don't really try to push any of our partners' stuff on you. We give them information and that you have, and will be the same case here. We always want to have takeaway things for you, but what I really love about Pledge It is we ourselves, HAL Sports, are always looking at, for our own charities and our partner charities and stuff, good fundraising platforms. And there's a lot out there and stuff. And one of the things that has really, I think, changed recently in the last few years is, and I think it's all down to social media, is we love to be engaged and we love things that engage us. And fundraising, intuitively, I always thought fundraising would be easier because social media was so widespread, because you could just post it on your Facebook page or your Instagram account or tweet about it and say, hey, I'm supporting this cause. It's important to me. Will you donate? It seems like such a great way to get the message out there. But I think the challenge has become with those is that so many people every day are posting things to donate to that we've kind of tuned them out. They're not unique. They're not different. So I can speak for my own charity. It's not necessarily true on all charities. Some have bigger bandwidth and ability to get out there and have bigger bases, but our own charity is fairly small. And our fundraising with social media, the increase in social media, our fundraising took the opposite effect. It went down by people fundraising. And part of that was that we were just part of the noise that everybody else was. People were tuning us out. They were being asked, if you look at social media, how many people are asking for your attention for something, whether it's some cute video they're doing, or if it's they're doing their own charity, they're asking you to donate. I mean, any day I feel like there's tons of people asking for donations for something or supporting something. And social media is a really busy thing. It takes a lot to something to grab our attention because there's so much of it that is hitting us every day. So what I loved about Pledge It is as you look for those of you that are doing fundraising initiatives in 2021, is when you're looking at if you're doing a virtual event or you're doing a hybrid event, maybe look at some unique ways to make fundraising fun. You've heard that before with fundraising being in there, but it could be something where if you're doing a hybrid event, maybe your virtual components, or if you're doing a full virtual, maybe instead, you can still have the traditional way of people fundraising and raising money and stuff, but maybe you make it a challenge where, hey, your virtual, instead of doing a 5K, they're going to do a 5K once a week for 3 weeks, and they're going to raise pledges. Their platform allows for this to happen. Or maybe what I loved, is maybe you're doing, and I think, I'm sure Scott and Dave will talk about how they got started, but I think it was, doing bench press. Was that right? Originally, they did a challenge, and how this all kind of came to be is they were raising money for a cause important to Scott, and it was doing a bench press and how many times you could bench press and stuff like that, and a pledge for each time they could do that. Raising money. So their platform allows for these unique ways to do fundraising and make it fun. So I think that what they're going to present to you will give you some good ideas on how you can look at how you're structuring your 2021 fundraising.
Thank you, Lonnie, for the excellent introduction. Again, my name is Dave Costlow. I'm here with our co-founder CEO Scott Shirly to talk a little bit about kind of some of the things that we've observed over the last 9 to 12 months in terms of fundraising, how it's evolved, and to share a little bit about hopefully some ways to think about kind of your virtual potential virtual events or how to adjust your in-person events given the kind of the 2021 implications that we're all dealing with. So, as we talk about what Pledge It means, talk a little bit more about our origin story. Lonnie was great to share, but we as an organization really kind of our roots we began really as a collection of athletes who wanted to help a teammate. Now, again, for those of you who heard the intro, I was a collegiate athlete, but really what kind of the aha moment or the inflection point for me was when a teammate of mine, who was Scott, was kind of shared the news that his father had been diagnosed with a rare disease. And they had sought the input of the best medical experts in the country. They had researched everything, had really explored what they felt like at the time was every available avenue, and really the overwhelming message that was delivered to their family, which Scott relayed to me, was, well, there's not a whole lot that we can do for my father. So, pretty much the advice has been to enjoy the time with him, because there may not be a lot left. And from a kind of out of kind of frustration and really kind of sheer willpower, said, there is an opportunity for us as athletes, to do something, to make a difference. And at the time, we had a lifting competition, as Lonnie alluded to, that actually very few of us actually liked participating in, because it was incredibly grueling and challenging. And the reward at the end of the day was kind of a pat on the back, and maybe some team friendly competition, but it was pretty incredibly difficult. And what we decided was, look, if we take the spotlight we have as collegiate athletes, and we played football for Joe Paterno at Penn State University, if we take the spotlight that we have and shine that on the rare disease community, we can bring attention to this cause, this kind of rare disease, which was kidney cancer that Scott's father had been diagnosed with. And that we can bring hope. We can bring a message of fundraising. We can bring a lot of things to the table that really kind of can ultimately impact the cause. And so I share that really because that's many ages ago, really, at this point, for both Scott and I. I won't admit how long that's been since we were collegiate athletes, but that's really where kind of, for us, this idea that technology and fundraising is should be available for anyone who wants to make a difference. And we've been fortunate to pledge it really to work with over time, work with over 400 or 500 professional athletes, raising money for causes that are meaningful for them. Working with some of the greatest nonprofits across the country, as well as some of the really passionate community-based organizations that really that have really made a difference in their community. And Pledge It being now a technology provider for those organizations, we get to participate in a lot of discussions. A lot of, I think Lonnie and Craig referenced late night conversations, strategy conversations, really trying to figure out, okay, how do we ultimately, as a nonprofit, raise funds? How do we create a compelling message for people to participate, for people to give? And when something like COVID-19 comes along, how do we throw out all those the best laid plans, and really not how do we adjust and react really in a matter of weeks and sometimes days? And so I share that really because that's really kind of what the founding of our organization, that's what we're about, and really excited to share kind of what we've heard today, and also learn from some of the other members that are sharing their insight in the conversation. So what is this idea of performance-based giving? So we started the idea of using a lifting competition to raise money, and ultimately that unfolded into working with professional athletes. So if you were Phillip Rivers, he raised money based on the number of touchdowns that he threw. If you were Larry Fitzgerald for the Arizona Cardinals, you could raise money based on the number of touchdowns you caught. But really, that idea evolved to really say, look, we can unleash this power not just for professional athletes, but really to empower any athlete. So the idea that as a nonprofit, we can help people unleash the power of your community to let their performance, whether it's every mile, push up, burpee, or pound lost, really to drive fundraising for your mission. So I talk a lot about kind of the professional athletes we've worked with, just to kind of communicate that we've been through a lot of kind of understanding how to make performance-based giving work. But I think what really excites us is seeing this technology in the hands of event organizers, nonprofits who empower thousands of people to participate in these virtual events, to really do incredible things and allow them to raise more money as a participant than they ever believed was possible. So there's a few examples here on the slide of incredible individuals who, for kind of lack of a better term, they were kind of everyday people, but they were participating in events, and they were empowered by this idea of performance-based giving, really inspired by this idea of performance-based giving, and took that to heart, and were able to make a difference for a cause that was incredibly important to them. So as we talked just a little bit about kind of how it works and what I mean by performance-based giving, I want to just kind of set the stage just briefly for kind of what does performance-based giving mean, this idea that you can pledge per kind of any stat, and how does it really work for kind of large multi-participant or even peer-to-peer events, if you're familiar with that terminology. Really from a kind of from a participant perspective, we've taken all of the kind of the hard and challenging kind of technology decisions out of the way. And it's really like setting, registering and participating in any other events. The idea that I can, go to whatever central location, I can register for my event, personalize my fundraising page, and ultimately share my story. And then as an individual, I collect pledges per mile. And then at the end of whatever that challenge is or that competition, whatever it looks like, I enter my results. And as a platform, we take care of all of the credit card processing, all of the issuing receipts, kind of all of the kind of back end hard work that goes into raising money to ultimately just allow participants to celebrate their success. So these performance-based events are incredibly easy for participants to join, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of the power that that exists when you start talking about performance-based giving and the motivation and the connections that it can create, among people and among participants, and even to donors that maybe otherwise are not engaged. So this idea from a kind of concepts, we've been fortunate to see all kinds of concepts, that we've worked with. There are some kind of pretty typical kind of events that we talk about now, mileage challenges that would, resonate, the idea of running miles, walking miles, cycling, miles. There are events kind of in the golf space for doing golf marathons, for those that may or may not be familiar with that. The idea that you're trying to play a certain number of holes in a given day or in a given defined time frame, and people are pledging kind of per hole played. It's a very interesting way to kind of take your traditional golf event and change it up and make it much more accessible. And with over the course of the last few years, as digital technology has improved and there are more people, kind of being kind of at home and everyday athletes, we're seeing a lot more kind of everyday athletes, wanting, and nonprofits wanting to mobilize them by creating fitness challenges. The number of burpees that you can do, the number of laps that people can complete, number of the pull-ups, or even just the idea that I've been active every single day and people tracking kind of day-to-day activity. So we've seen kind of, fitness, golf, mileage challenges, but also I think I even alluded this to in the outset, the idea that you can really use kind of the platform to create any kind of, competitive or creative a-thon. The idea that there could be competitive eating. We've seen hot wing eating challenges. We've also seen things that slant more educational, where there were readathons and people were pledging to book read. We've seen nature and kind of conservatory groups, or those that are focused on environmental, run bird watching campaigns where every participant goes out for the weekend and counts the number of species that they can see in a certain preserve, and raising money to ultimately keep that preserve up and coming. So from a kind of flexibility perspective, this idea of performance-based giving really can be applied to almost an infinite number of ways. And I think it's not so much the flexibility that's important, but the ability to then think about, well, how does that flexibility allow us to create events that are meaningful for our group and for our community, as we're talking about what does 2021 look like. And how does fundraising remain something that's inspiring and engaging, and as Lonnie even alluded to, could actually be fun. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of why are performance events so compelling, and certainly there's a kind of a financial impact, and I'll get to that at the end of this slide. But I want to talk a little bit about the connection that this creates. So you're in your typical typical kind of fundraising activity, the idea that you're participating, you've signed up, and you maybe have a fundraising page, or you're asking people to give. As Lonnie alluded to, there are thousands of events like that, and there are so many people asking for support, and there's not a whole lot of differentiation to say, well, why is that interesting? Actually, this morning I've been solicited twice already to support some close friends to give to annual charities. Like many of you, I'm sure that we're constantly receiving those types of solicitations. But the difference, when we talk about kind of your traditional form of kind of asking for a simple gift, and the idea of performance-based fundraising, is the fundraiser is actually doing something, or the participant's actually doing something here in return. So it's not just, hey, would you support and give $50 to my cause or $100 to my cause? It's saying, hey, I'm going to go and I'm going to run 100 miles. Would you pledge $1 for every mile that I run? And would you, I'm going to go and attempt, I'm going to attempt to be active for the next 2 weeks, to support the local food bank. Would you support that? So there's something compelling and interesting from the donor's perspective, but also the idea, one of the things that's really interesting is really the big difference is the kind of the excitement and the enthusiasm for the actual fundraiser. So the fundraiser themselves is much more willing to ask because they don't feel like they're asking for a simple handout. The idea that they're doing something in return, the idea that they're, in our terminology, we talk about earning it, the idea that they're earning this, the support for the cause is really incredible. And so as you start to kind of back away from just that kind of that slight difference in psychology for the participant to say, oh, I'm actually earning the money, you can start to look at then the connections that it creates, from the fundraiser to all the different participants in an event like this. So obviously there's a strong connection between the fundraiser and the cause, and having kind of this idea of a shared performance goal can really be beneficial. But also, there's an interesting connection that starts to occur between the fundraiser and the donor. So, in a classic sense, if I donate $50 to Lonnie's charity, that's really interesting, but I don't have any additional information. There's nothing really additional happening. If I pledge for Lonnie to run 100 miles, well, I'm going to be interested to know, well, how does Lonnie, how does he do? How does Lonnie, kind of keep pace every day, to his goal towards 100 miles? So there's now this, additional connection from between the donor and the fundraiser that is so vital when we're talking about kind of virtual events where there's not a lot of opportunities to create connection. Well, the actual act of fundraising is bringing the donor and the fundraiser together, because as the fundraiser begins to record their mileage or record their results, the donor is receiving those updates and can watch in real time, kind of as the fundraising totals increase. And there's other ways that this drives, this idea of performance-based giving drives connection. The idea that if you're participating on a team and you're all kind of working towards some collective goal, as a team captain, instead of kind of just looking at, well, how much money has a certain person raised, or kind of who has raised the most money, you can really encourage people to be active and be engaged by, how are they doing on their physical challenge goal, on their performance goal. It's another way to create connection, as well as really incredible kind of friendly competition, amongst the team, so that, because no one wants to be the person, who didn't achieve their performance goal. The other benefits are certainly kind of, as you look at kind of fundraisers to fundraisers and teams to teams, as you start to aggregate the performance data and you have some relatively competitive athletes, you can start to see this idea of mileage, kind of the team mileage, really adding up and being kind of something that teams themselves will compete against. You've got large groups of people not only trying to raise more money, but also trying to record. Kind of when I talk about creating those connections, I think it's really important because it creates this really engaging experience, but ultimately it then also puts us in a position where, well, what does that connection yield? Well, that connection yields ultimately more money for your organization or for your event. On average, we see that fundraisers are willing to ask 20 to 30% more people. I think we all know that if you're trying to raise money, the biggest challenge is getting participants to ask more people. And this concept of performance-based giving does just that. The other benefit is that generally donors who kind of make a performance pledge are also likely to give a little bit more on average than they otherwise would. So we see that donors are kind of emotionally invested in the outcome of what someone has said that they're going to do, their task or their performance goal, and so they'll give more dollars to that cause. And then I think one of the important things is you look to how events evolve over time is that kind of the nuance and the interesting opportunity to kind of activate and participate as a fundraiser is fundraisers are more likely to repeat and participate again in events when performance-based giving is an element of the overall program. So as you're looking at year 2 and year 3, if you can maintain and really grow and maintain kind of a higher percentage of your participants year to year, it makes it that much more successful for the overall event as you look at the out years of how events evolve. So again, really kind of some interesting connections are created through this, this kind of basic concept of performance-based giving that ultimately creates a stronger connection between the people that are there, as well as delivers more dollars to the fundraising goal and objective for the overall event. So we talked a little bit about performance-based fundraising, but now I want to shift focus just a little bit to say, okay, well, how do I then approach this idea of virtual events? And I know Lonnie and Craig, have criticized the word virtual. I don't love the word virtual either, but it does seem to be kind of the word that, that everyone uses to talk about these types of events. And so I wanted to offer really some of the things that we've heard over the course of the last really 9 months and working with our nonprofit partners. Types, taking an event completely virtual, or making a form of a hybrid event where there is a significant virtual component. Number one that we hear the folks we work with saying, the ones that are very successful, is they focus heavily on the positives of being virtual. I think initially there was certainly a lot of frustration and challenge about, hey, we've always done a great event this way, and it's been very successful for us. And then certainly as kind of early March and April and into May, as people were trying to grapple with how they dealt with events maybe not being able to be executed in the way they've always run, the organizations that we saw be the most successful are the ones that step back and said, okay, well, look, this has to be a positive for us. Where are the opportunities in these types of virtual events? And, the number one thing that that we hear is, look, virtual events expands the audience of the potential participants. That after they hold one of these virtual events, they get comments, feedback, input from folks who said, I've always wanted to participate in the in-person event, but for whatever reason, either geographically or timing wise, I wasn't able to do so. And so that virtual event creates that opportunity. Certainly when you're thinking about kind of virtual and hybrid events, the idea of creating flexibility is really important as we talk about kind of risk mitigation. And Lonnie and Cree and the community here spent a lot of time thinking about this. But this idea that if you have a virtual or a hybrid, if you have a kind of virtual option, it allows you to adjust, as we all know, kind of as regulations change and expectations change and plans change. It allows the opportunity for participants who may have been participating in person to now shift to kind of a virtual element. And I think the kind of the last point, that enthusiasm was really almost boiling over, and she really kind of. Oh, did I get muted there? She almost yelled into the microphone that this is an opportunity for us to experiment. We can do a lot of great things. There are things we've always wanted to try, so let's try them this year. And it created a great way for us for that organization to experiment with their event for in the 2020 year. So I think when thinking about methods of kind of how do you go virtual, hybrid, and we talk a lot about, well, what is there? Are there certain stats? Are there certain kind of performance metrics that we should be thinking about? As we say, look, there's always consider community, and I know Lonnie emphasizes a pretty similar point. Consider the community and think about how you make it memorable. If your event is one that you really want to create a strong connection to the cause, you may want to focus on some kind of virtual performance statistic that is related to your cause. So the idea, we work with a lot of military, kind of causes that benefit military and veteran personnel, and we see a lot of them investing in pull-up competitions, mostly because most veterans are very familiar with the stat of pull-ups. There's also a lot of evidence that, or a lot of ways to kind of build on the idea of kind of pulling someone up and kind of helping them out, that it really kind of resonates with a lot of the veteran community when you're talking about how do you create connection to the cause. We also see kind of thinking about and focusing on inclusivity to maximize participation. So it's not just kind of the ultra competitive athlete or the ultra competitive runner or the incredible cyclist, who's going to log a lot of miles or a lot of training days. The idea that simply being active can be incredibly powerful to kind of bring the maximum number of people together. So we've worked with some folks who really turned their previously in-person event into a 2-week-long challenge to simply be active every single day and encourage healthy living and encourage daily daily physical activity. And people were simply pledging per day of physical activity as a way to kind of empower and really motivate the largest possible group for the fundraising. And then, I talk about tailoring to your audience. There are obviously events that have kind of the ultra competitive or the kind of ultra athletic folks, particularly in the cycling space, but also in kind of the ultra running community, where the idea of not just the event and how many miles could you run in a certain day or how many laps could you complete on a certain course, but the idea that maybe logging and creating a way to really highlight the training miles that go into being that kind of elite athlete. And so over the course of a month, people are not only talking about, well, how many miles am I going to do on the quote unquote event day or event weekend, but you can pledge towards all the training miles that are included, kind of up until that point from a fundraising perspective. And it really creates then an incentive for the participants to kind of share their mileage and share their progress, over the course of a month instead of just on a single day. So we'll talk a little bit then about some of the kind of the tips for success that we've seen, kind of really, real examples. And I've emphasized a few of these points, and I think Lonnie and Cree have also talked about these from a kind of overall event management. Considering your community, I think one of the big things that we see, kind of the best partners that we work with, is they come up with an initial concept when they're talking about, adding a virtual component or adding, making the event a hybrid. Well, they come up with an initial concept, and then they go out to some of their, longtime participants or some of their community and say, hey, what do you think of this idea? And that collaboration really kind of pulls people closer to the, the fundraising concept, and can often, that's some of the best ideas can be generated through that. I think Lonnie hammered on the point of kind of regular communication and how important that is when you're talking about virtualizing event, not only to set expectations, but really then because you're now thinking about almost a separate kind of digital event that's where people maybe aren't going to have as many touch points in person, and even if they are in person, there's going to be spaced out, and bringing people together is really very difficult to do for kind of a large speech or kind of a gathering to talk about the mission and the impact of the fundraising. Well, looking at that is then, well, how do we digitally take that opportunity to say, let's leverage our email channels and our social channels to really kind of lean into the opportunity to say, we can't communicate to all of these people in person, so let's offer some more digital tools to really, for people to get closer to our mission and understand the impact of what we're doing. I think one of the kind of the biggest lessons learned for a lot of the virtual events that we ran really kind of in the early stages of the pandemic was people went virtual, but they kind of forgot this idea that there should be a culminating event. This idea that kind of bringing everyone together, kind of setting a goal for the whole group to say, hey, we will participate over the course of the next 2 weeks to log as many miles as possible. Then ultimately, kind of on the last day of the event or the final weekend, some of the events kind of miss the opportunity to really bring everyone together and to celebrate the victory and the fundraising success that they've had. So I think hosting a culminating kind of virtual event, whether that is kind of through your social channels or if you're kind of those maybe more technically inclined, looking at some of the ways to do a YouTube live stream or platforms like that, where you can really kind of bring people in, invite them to participate or invite them to attend a Zoom that is ultimately about talking about the mission and thanking the participants for everything they've done. And then I think one of the maybe kind of more nuanced tactics that we've seen be really successful is, is to reconsider your incentive and your recognition strategy as you're hosting a virtual event. For those that may be doing a virtual event for the first time, I think that one of the challenges is really to try to create that early adoption. And so I'll talk in more detail about some of the specifics, but the idea that you want to incentivize people to be early adopters, whether that's by, taking some of the t-shirts that you've ordered and that you have on, available, and kind of making them incentives for people who kind of sign up in the first 3-4 days of participating, and then kind of share the fact that they're participating on social wearing that shirt. So you're trying to create, the digital community that around the event that is still going to occur, but is ultimately now kind of in a new and different form. And so everyone's, most participants, may be a little bit reluctant to change. So if you can create some incentives to really kind of encourage behavior for early adopters, and encouraging those early participants to share, that can really create a lot of momentum for your event, as you look to kind of building a substantial virtual component, for a 2021 horizon. So I'll jump into a few examples here, and then we'll have some time to take questions at the end. So from a kind of strategy perspective, this was an interesting customer. They're a partner that we got to work with, where they took an existing event to virtual, really kind of at the very, very last minute. And this was in 2020, a pretty familiar story, potentially to many of you, and for good reason. So, it's a Ronald McDonald House event. It was a long-standing event that was, a kind of a very classic community run walk event. And they moved to virtual really with, about 2 weeks notice. And kind of what they did in kind of response to the need to move virtual was they created a run walk challenge, during the entire month of the original event. Now, and I talked a little bit about this. Their goal was not necessarily to record the maximum number of miles, but they wanted to focus on, hey, everyday healthy activity. Because that was a way that they connected kind of everyday and healthy living to their mission, and to the mission of Ronald McDonald House, and helping their communities, because every day they had families that needed their support. So they focused on inclusivity when kind of structuring the event and the original stat. I also thought that they did an incredible job with their fundraising strategy. So they had many of kind of the classic incentives for here's the top fundraiser could receive certain prizes or things like that. But they really leaned in then to the idea of, well, how are we going to get people to engage with us when we're all now remote and we're all participating digitally? So what they did was they kind of took one of the t-shirts that had been popular in the past and ordered a very limited lot of kind of exclusive t-shirts, and made those available as kind of incentive for people to kind of sign up early, in this new virtual fundraising challenge. So for an investment of around $200, they were able to drive kind of the first 50 people right into the door into this new virtual fundraising challenge, and really kind of create this comfort that kind of the fundraising event was still going to occur in the way that it always had, in terms of creating connection, but it was just going to be executed differently. They also created some really interesting incentives around people kind of posting and sharing what they were doing every day. And they also kind of repurposed the idea of a raffle. And instead of taking kind of their standard raffle prizes that were always available the day of the event, what they did was they said, okay, for every mile you log while you're participating, that's going to create a chance for you to participate in the raffle. So if you log 10 miles, you get 10 chances in the raffle. If you log 100 miles, you get 100 chances in the raffle. So they really kind of, they really focused on how can we take the incentives that on a typical race day are available from a fundraising perspective, and let's change that and kind of really focus on how now, if we're creating a fully virtual event, how can they be kind of more effective and really more engaged in the actual virtual activity. I think the last thing I'll highlight here is from a kind of, as they invested more in kind of their digital communication and the tools, they were able to secure a substantially larger digital sponsor for the event because they had more information and more data about why people were participating and who was participating and how often were kind of people seeing seeing some of the logos and the kind of the impressions of the actual sponsor of the event. So they use the data from their virtual event to really show that, hey, we have a very highly engaged community, has a really strong presence, and because of that, one of their longtime sponsors nearly doubled what they normally contributed to that. So from a results perspective, the event normally had done 25,000 in a normal year, really allowed them to raise 45,000 in a year when they thought, well, we might not raise any money, or we might only raise $5,000. So from a success perspective, kind of going virtual at the last minute not only allowed them to kind of raise more money, but it's now kind of taught them how they want to think about approaching this event in the future. So the next example I want to highlight is really kind of taking a virtual event, taking an in-person event that was really an experience ride. They went virtual in 2020 because they had to, but now because of the impact that they've seen, they're now considering, or they're not planning on, a hybrid approach in 2021. So the organization is a group that focuses on fighting pediatric cancer. They have their traditional fundraising structure was a kind of a week-long experiential ride that really had to transition to virtual, but they had a pretty long planning horizon to do so. And what I really liked or thought was incredible about this organization and their response was they initially thought about, well, how can we go virtual, and maybe we'll just do a virtual weekend. And they really invested the time to go out and speak to their kind of longtime participants and understand what would be interesting and exciting. And they really came back with a concept where it was a multi-week kind of ride for a child challenge that kind of offered their longtime passionate cyclists the opportunity to showcase the incredible amount of training that they do for an event like this. And that really kind of re-energized some of their longtime cyclists that love the experiential ride, had always participated, but now there's kind of a way to make it interesting for multiple weeks leading up to when the actual event occurred. So the organization invested in talking to their initial participants. They also, in that kind of brainstorming session, they came up with what they credit to be one of the linchpins of the event. Was they created virtual riding teams that, instead of being just collections of riders, which they always were in the past, they created riding teams that were riding in honor of specific children. And this allowed so that anyone who's participating, they could choose from a collection of specific children that were benefiting from the money being raised, and it really allowed then the riders to really have a much closer connection to the cause, as opposed to kind of forming their own teams and just competing kind of rider to rider. They're now kind of competing in a friendly way, to honor of specific children. The virtual option also expanded the audience because it was an experienced ride. That was not something that all of their community could always participate in, and so the going virtual expanded the audience. And as they looked at their data from 2020, the new participants, or their first time participants, raised almost 35% of the total funds in 2020, and whereas typically it's closer to 10%. So they had a massive kind of influx of new people and new funds, and we're really, really excited about the opportunity to build on that going forward. And as I mentioned, the competitive riders kind of love the opportunity to kind of share their mileage, on an ongoing basis. And so every time they logged miles, they could share it with their donor community. They had people asking them, talking to them about, what it takes to train and train over the course of 2 to 3 months for an event like this. And then ultimately, they had a really kind of excellent culmination event where they set up Zoom conferences for kind of the patient families that were benefiting and that benefited from the funds raised. And so the actual riders got to meet the honored child that they were riding in honor of. So really created a special and unforgettable event that allowed the riders to really see the impact of their fundraising. Again, so results-wise, they raised over 150K with their event. They had done, I think, around 130 or so previously. So in a year where they were concerned about, falling below 100,000 for the first time in a long time, they actually increased, about 20% of their fundraising. And now, as I mentioned, they're also planning to run their ride, both an experience ride as well as the hybrid ride in 2021. And so they're going to operate two kind of they plan to operate two relatively large events, that offer the experience ride for the riders who still want that challenge, but they're investing heavily into creating the hybrid ride to attract people from a much larger geographic footprint than they ever thought was possible with their experience ride. And then the last one I'll talk about here is an organization, Uplifting Athletes, which Scott and I have a very close connection to. But I think they were probably maybe in the most of all the partners we've worked with. They were one of the ones most hardest hit by COVID. They had lots of spring and summer fundraisers lined up, and as the as the implications of social distancing began to take hold, they really had to make the difficult decision to cancel every single kind of major fundraising activity that they had planned planned for the spring and the summer. And then we're faced with the challenge of, well, how do we create something that we've never done before? And how do we ultimately raise money with it? So when I talk about late nights, there were lots of those and working with them. But ultimately what they looked at was an opportunity to really bring together, a large national community in a way they'd never done before. And they created a mileage challenge that was, again, relevant to their audience. So, uplifting athletes, empowers people, that are affected or afflicted with rare diseases to empower them with hope. And so there are 7,000 rare diseases in the there diseases that are classified as rare anyway in the United States. And so they took that 7,000 mile number and said, look, that's the mileage challenge that we're going to approach as a team. So they created a virtual fundraising challenge that would, over the course of 2 weeks, they encourage people to participate nationally, and ultimately fundraising was part of the objective, but also one of the main focuses was one of inspiration and hope. They wanted to inspire the rare disease patients and their families, that there are thousands of people across the U.S. That care about these causes. And so the mileage challenge was they used that number as really kind of a rallying point and a motivating factor for a good portion of their audience. I think one thing that's interesting to note, particularly with this event, but with all events, in the 2020, they had lots of folks who, uplifting athletes had lots of folks who admitted that this year was not a year where they could maybe financially give as much as they may have in year past, or potentially couldn't give at all. But they felt like their ability to participate virtually and contribute towards that virtual total, that virtual fundraising objective, in terms of a mileage, that was how they could participate this year. And so it allowed uplifting athletes to create a way to kind of retain their long time advocates, maybe who couldn't contribute this year, but are optimistic that they'll be able to contribute in a year when maybe things aren't so difficult for them personally. So, uplifting athletes, set that overall goal. They, executed their event over the course of a kind of a 2-week, 2-week time frame. Invested heavily in their kind of their email as well as their social communication. They do have a kind of a generally slightly younger demographic, so they were able to invest more heavily in social channels than some other groups would. I think they did some really creative things, even with Instagram, and creating Instagram filters of people who, when they completed their challenge, were able to kind of put on an Instagram filter for their photo and kind of have an uplifting athletes branded mask. It was really kind of a cool thing to see across thousands of participants doing that at the same time. And from a results perspective, they raised over $50,000 again in a year when they were when they were faced with potentially having no funds flowing in for over the course of several months. And they've now made the kind of the virtual mileage challenge a tentpole event for for 2021 and beyond. They believe they've kind of created and connected with people in a new way that they didn't previously think was possible through their in-person events. And so they're going to continue to invest in it. They've just kind of adjusted where it falls in their calendar so that they can now run a virtual challenge like this, but also still invest in some of the in-person events that they think are excellent. So I've got a few additional kind of things we can talk about from case study or some specific social content that we can share. But I do want to be sensitive to the overall time, the overall calendar here. So with that, I'll pause and open it up for any questions as we kind of look here, kind of on the takeaway slide. It's really kind of the points I've emphasized throughout the presentation today.
Thanks a lot, Dave, and for that. It gives a lot of things to think about. I was going to say that I think it's one of the things as we look forward to 2021 and beyond. It isn't so much that these areas are there to replace your in-person events. As talk about, because we talk a lot about virtual and being able to do things in a virtual way. What it's really done is it's allowed people to do some of these activities in a pledging way that keeps people engaged. It's a new way to engage people. And I think that's one of the things that we're going to see that I hope actually does stick around in the future, because we all look for interesting ways to fundraise, and we know people love to be engaged with things. And for those of you that have attended our symposiums beforehand, I always talk about the PER effect, PERR, which is you have to make events feel personable. You have to make them engaging, and they have to be remarkable to be remarketable. And those are different components that you add to those events. And this is something that you can add to your event, whether it's in person or hybrid or virtual or really at a home edition, allows people to participate. But what this is going to do for the future is allows you to come up with unique challenges and different ways to engage donors, larger your sponsors and stuff, because now, you can take as an example, you can take this premise and expand it outside of your base of where you're at. Because your in-person event, people will come and people still want to do in-person events. That's not going to go away, thank goodness, because if it does, I'm out of a job. People love to still get together and love to do these in-person events. But what this allows you to do for those that can't be there for whatever reason, or they're in a different state, or they want to support, it allows you to be able to do that. It also allows you to engage with people at a longer time. Your event isn't just one day. And I've been saying that for years. Your event isn't one day. Your event is some of the things, the activities that from the time that somebody registers for your event, that's when you need to start engaging with them. And you need to engage with them up and through the end and actually year round, because there's so many things catching our attention now that want our attention, it's easy to forget about them. And you want to stay relevant and you want to stay engaging with them. This gives you ways with your in-person events or creating new challenges and stuff throughout the year to keep engaged with people and keep them active. And I was thinking, stair climbs, going back to, and again, I know we have several with the American Lung Association, and that has been a big fundraiser for them. Looking at 2021, many of them are pivoting to stadium climbs that are outdoors, because indoors creates a challenge. Everybody's in stairwells. We can get good ventilation, but arguably people are touching, and it's gonna be really hard for us to go in between climbers and climb up and clean all the railings and stuff. So there's some challenges that are going to make it very difficult, but a stadium climb is completely different and allows us flexibility. But I also know that there's going to be probably, for the American Lung Association, one of the ideas, and I've shared this with some of the local groups and have even been talking with their national office, is what about creating a challenge that is virtual or at home edition for people to climb stairs or take steps or something like that. And then a way to be able to count, because we have some interesting technologies that can help and show that people can count. You count towards that larger goal. Like Dave said, is that the whole team had a goal of 7,000 miles. So think that, American Lung Association for the year of 2021 wants to do 1 million steps or whatever it is. And everybody goes into that, from the time frame and is helping get to that goal and is raising money at the same time to make that happen. And maybe they're doing it at the in-person event for their numbers, and maybe they're doing it at home, but it's a good way to be able to create that challenge, and for the American Lung Association specifically to bring in those much needed funds or for your charity. The other thing too is that I think it gives a unique opportunity for your larger donors and sometimes your sponsors that put in a part of donation to these programs is, I think about, and this was before COVID, but there's this little primary school in Denver, in the city, and every year they do a fundraiser where they have kids from pre-K up to 5th grade. They have a little playground area that has a small field. It's to go around it is 1/10 of a mile, and they have the kids run for an hour and 15 minutes. I don't know why they came up with 75 minutes, but they have 75 minutes, and they run as many laps as they can on this 1/10 of a mile lap. And, and they've got a little pit stop area, and the kids, those that are younger will stop, and they can take breaks whenever they want. But, and they do it they do it a pledge style, and they try to raise money for the school and the programs. It's actually their largest fundraising event that they do the entire year. It usually brings in between $40,000 to $50,000 for them. And what I also find remarkable is, so these kids are going out there and getting pledges from their grandparents and mom and dad and aunts and uncles. But what they usually have is a couple of business community members or some people that have the means that will actually donate, not on what each kid does, but what the total is that all the kids do. Sometimes they cap it because they don't want it to go over a certain amount if they get really engaged in it. But usually somebody's making a donation between 5,000 to 6,000. It's how many laps. So they did 5,000 to 6,000 cumulative laps together as a combined group team, or all the kids, and they make a donation. So think about your sponsors. Maybe part of their sponsorship is a donation of maybe even a match of what somebody's doing, or maybe it's, the total team goal is 7,000 miles, or maybe it's for American Lung Association, it's 1 million steps, and maybe they're going to donate 10 cents per step that everybody participates. So it's a different way to engage people. And what I think about this is these are ways going in the future that when, 2021 year, I feel is going to be the year of a mix of virtual, and hybrid and maybe full in-person events. But when we get to 2022, some of these things that we've developed in 2020 are going to be great for expanding our reach and fundraising and our events outside of the walls of our event in person. So I think those are some really cool things. And I have to say, they didn't really show it here, but I strongly encourage you, if you have any interest in talking with Dave and Scott, and you know, I'm not receiving anything for promoting them or anything like that, but I think they've had some really great ideas, and they're also very open to working with you and talk about your ideas that you have and seeing what, based on their experience, on maybe helping you out. And their platform has been really good. I haven't used it personally, but I've gotten some demos on it. And I actually plan to do I'm hoping to do a challenge for the year of 2021 for our own foundation of how many miles I ride my bike, which for those of you who know me, I've been kind of obsessed doing that. So I'm up to 6,000 miles so far for 2020. So if I get you to donate, if you do $1 per mile, I love you, but please don't, but just realize I can ride a lot of miles. But jokingly aside, their platform is very easy to use. It makes that social experience and share very easy while people are completing their challenges and pledging, and it makes the back end is also very clean to use. So sometimes I see platforms that have a really great user interface from the participant perspective or the registrant perspective or the fundraising perspective, but the back end for administration is terribly hard to navigate. So they have a really great way, and I would say I'm comfortable to say that I think I've learned enough about Dave and Scott that even if you don't use their platform, they're more than happy to share ideas, because they want everybody to be stronger together and help you out.